Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Why do you think you're a dork? I don't think you're a dork. I don't think Mom thinks you're a dork.
Mike thinks I'm a dork.
Mike is a dork.
Well, so am I.
Well, if it's any consolation, I love you. And if this guy can't see in you all the beautiful and wonderful things that I see, then he's got the problem.
I know. It just hurts.
That's why they call them crushes.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. How about that for a beginning here? You're here with Douglas Viviani. Of course, David Cohen's unfortunately under the weather, cannot make it today. But that's okay, because I have a special guest star co-host for the week. And you just heard a little bit of him. That's a little piece of 16 Candles. We have the privilege of speaking today with what some people say, and he's more than that, but we can just start off with the idea of America's dad, Paul Dooley. He's performed stand-up comedy. He's acted on stage, television, movies since the early 50s. You definitely know this gentleman when you see him. He's premiered in television in 1962, and he's continued to appear up until Modern Family this year, and certainly he's going to be beyond that. I count 132 TV shows, not appearances, shows in total, including appearances on Get Smart, Electric Company, which we'll talk about, Sesame Street, Golden Girls, Alf, Wonder Years, My So-Called Life, Grace Under Fire, Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, The Practice, and, of course, Curb Your Enthusiasm. We've seen him there as well. So, let's turn to the movies for a moment, by the way. Paul Dooley's appeared in just to start a little bit here, The Out-of-Towners, Slapshot, Breaking Away, Popeye, 16 Candles, Runaway Bride, Insomnia, is Sarge to your kids, let's say, in Cars 1, 2, and 3, just to name a few of the 80 movie appearances he's made to date. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again, Paul Dooley.
Hello, I'm old and new again.
Aren't we all? We're reinventing ourselves all the time in some ways. I'll tell you, that was something that was what would you say, impressive to me when I was reviewing all of the material that you have done. People look at you and they say, oh, yeah, I know him from the Wonder Years, or I know him from, different appearances here and there. But certainly Breaking Away, I would think, as a dad, and in Molly Ringwald's, 16 Candles as a dad and so forth. You've done much more than that, but do you get that? Does that follow you, that kind of moniker that, you're, a good dad figure on the...
Those two films kind of put me on the map, especially Breaking Away. And also, 16 Candles made me the go-to guy to be the dad to female actresses in the movies. And I've done a lot of things, and a lot of them I like, but my favorite one was Breaking Away.
How about that? Okay, so we hit upon the right thing there, because it was fun and funny, and also in some way touching, or a dad that really, like a lot of dads, let's say, and I think some now, but also we're a little more open, I think, today. But back then, that the dad in that movie couldn't really 100% express his feelings, so he was able to do it in a sort of backwards way, and we really reflected society.
They were always stoic, those kind of guys. Right,
exactly. I think
they thought to show any emotion was weakness.
There you go, and you certainly presented that in that movie, and then developed.
My dad was among them, and I use him as a template for me when I play fathers, because if there's a little bit grouchy or cranky, I just use my dad.
There you go. I'm sure he's happy to hear that, so to speak, where he is now. I'm sure he's looking down and really enjoying your work, and your tip of your cap to your family and growing up. You never forget the things.
Never even knew I was doing him. He wasn't aware of that.
But he knows now in some ways, if we think about it, right? Now, listen, I just want to take a little bit of a clip here. It's very short, but I want to bring a little bit of Breaking Away and Deep Space Nine together, and I'll tie them together in a minute. So let's just play this and take 20 seconds or so. Let's listen to what we have here.
Pop,
sure.
Can I have this Saturday off?
Hell no.
Just this once, Pop. The Italians are coming Saturday.
I don't care if the second coming's coming.
We're poor, but we're honest.
All I want is a refund. Refund?
Refund? Are you crazy?
I'll do as you ask, on one condition. That you don't ask me this favor as a mentor or a superior officer, but as a father asking his son.
So even the dad theme went through your appearance on Deep Space Nine, appearances as Garrick's dad, and that was...
He presented himself as a nice, warm, friendly guy, but he was a pain in the ass. Evil, in fact.
It had to be interesting for you to play that, where it was a kind of a not straightforward role, right? He was a kind of a playing it, as you say, he was presenting himself one way, but behind the scenes he was another.
Yeah, he was told to me to be a guy like an American CIA head who had retired and is now pulling the strings from the outside, like a kingmaker, you know. It's a rare thing for me to play that guy who didn't have any humor, really. Just a kind of an evil quality.
Yeah, but even so, there was at the end. This is, maybe not everybody remember the exact scene and so forth, but at the end of the life of that character, who basically did not own his son, so to speak, did not own the ownership in the fact that he had a son, this Garrick. At the very end, in his own way, he did acknowledge that he did have
a bit of a change up, yeah.
Yeah, so that, you might want to tune into that episode. It really is touching and memorable. And that's what I want to ask you about is to appear on a show like that and to appear on lots of shows that you've done and be able to create a memorable character where, let's face it, Deep Space Nine had created so many characters on their own of series, characters that are there every week that the audience gets to know. Now you're coming in for a couple episodes here and there, but you're memorable. Is there some trick to that? How do you come on board and be able to stand up to, let's say, the characters that are already so well known by the audience?
I don't think it's a trick. I think there's a certain amount of talent involved.
I would think so too.
Yeah, and I just always do the best I can with what I've been given.
And then,
as a character actor, you're sometimes given a kind of the TV show or the movie is never about the character actor. He's a supporting actor, so he'll have to take a scene with one scene with 10 or 12 lines and kind of do something with it. I've often told young actors what I did. I sometimes say a part is handed to me, and it's like a damp washcloth, and I have to squeeze it and wring out a little humor, a little pathos, a little kind of attention-getting, something I have to do on my own to make a dull part a little more interesting.
Right, and that's definitely something, I mean, like it did, just off the top of my head, the Wonder Years there, where you probably don't recall, everybody listening, you might or might not, this one appearance of this soccer coach who was, in the day, he was a big football coach, he was sort of his last year of teaching, and this new sport of soccer comes around, and I'm going to guess now, you had like 5 lines in that appearance, but you're reading the paper and the way you're walking around and the looks that you made and so forth for that particular episode was memorable. So I get what you're saying, right? Is a good example of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's I didn't have a whole lot of lines, and he was sort of a negative sounding character, but I think people found him interesting. I still get the occasional request for an autograph for a guy who loved the Wonder Years.
And I'm one of those, I'll tell you, and that's why I guess I remember that. I mean, think about it. I remember one episode with you there off the top of my head like that. It is something that if you grew up, I guess, in the 60s and 70s, that certainly show reflects what you saw, and you did see coaches like that. The other side of the fence is in the 70s, 1971, you created the Electric Company. I don't know if anybody really remembers that you did that or knows that. At age 43, by the way, after doing lots of other stuff, which we'll talk about. But if you don't remember the Electric Company, it's more or less skits and a Sesame Street for older kids. How did you come up with creating that? That's so interesting.
Well, they called me in and talked to me, and I think it's because they knew me. I had a long stretch, in fact, 10 years or more, of writing radio commercials that were humorous, based on improvisation with 2 partners of mine from Second City. We were all Second City. And I had a background of doing short segments which were informative in that they talked about the sponsor or the product, So I was a perfect kind of a guy for them to have. But at first I wasn't the head writer. There were 6 or 7 of us writers, and we wrote in limbo for about 6 weeks, they said, write anything you want to as long as you think it would help kids learn to read. And the stuff that I came up with seemed to be more useful to them and funny, more funny in particular. A whole host of different characters. And then one day they said, okay, you're the head writer. Then the other 6 guys hated me. Because you get promoted over somebody.
Right. It's like Yogi Berra when he became the manager of the Yankees, right? He was great as the catcher and the fellow teammate, but afterwards, now he's in charge. Yeah. It's a little difficult. Unfortunately, we'll have to pick this up in a moment because we're out of time. On Everything Old is New Again with Paul Dooley. We'll be back right after this. Everything Old is New Again.
We're gonna turn it on. We're gonna bring you the power. We're gonna light up the dark night and bring the brightest day in a whole new way. We're gonna turn it.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
My gosh, are people still listening to the radio? You betcha. Yes,
Absolutely.
they are.
Absolutely.
And
one form
that's
or
why what you're doing right now, everything old is new again. Yes, it is. It's new. It's something that people have not done for a while and say, oh my gosh, I could listen to that. They're creative people. And that's what's wonderful.
Yeah. Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. Well, before I announce who that is, we'll play a little bit of This Is Your Life, I guess, with our guest Paul Dooley. Does that voice sound familiar? Put you on the spot here.
Yeah.
Bob Caliban, right?
That's right. One of my good buddies.
How about that? And he's been on the show a couple of times. He's a terrific gentleman, a real fun man. We did a show, a couple of shows with him and Paul Hecht about Radio Mystery Theater, which he was on many, many times, a radio show. I bring him up because I saw and found some tapes here from 1982 and let's say the early 80s. The Bottom Line in New York City, where you and Mr. Caliban were on stage performing different commercials, which I think you just referenced previously a little bit towards when we were talking about the creation of the electric company and what you had done. Let me just tease the audience a little bit. Let's play a small clip of you two together on stage, and let's explore that a little bit.
Majesty rolling in Majesty roll on 5.
Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program of oral hygiene and regular professional care.
I love that, Bob. Keep the roll, but it's a little too upper crust, maybe more of an average.
Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program of oral
Hold the roll, Bob. Same thing. Bring it home. Back to New York.
Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program.
To New York, maybe Midwest.
Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program of oral hygiene and regular professional care.
A little General Mills, don't you think?
It goes on and on. That's a producer, or let's say a director of a commercial, trying to get the best out of his voice actor.
Well, I picked one of the most busy and the most talented people to be in that show with me, and Bob could do almost any dialect. He could do impressions, and the show was terrific. It was meant for one night. And although we never got around to it, the Broadway producers wanted to bring it right to Broadway. But because of a bunch of things about clearance and waivers, about using certain things, it didn't happen. But it was really a big hit on one night. And the manager of the nightclub had invited a ton of advertising people there. And they were just sitting ducks for our humor because we were making fun of them and the commercials, and particularly people who made their own commercials. They were hilarious.
Yes, like a Crazy Eddie.
Caliban's a very, very good buddy of mine, and I worked with him. Commercials written by other people and commercials we put together and we wrote, and I did about 700 radio commercials.
It's amazing, yes, and mostly, not mostly, but in the 70s was the heyday of that for you. Was that right? In the 60s or
the middle 60s into the 70s?
Right, and that's right during and after Bob Caliban was on Radio Mystery Theater. He did lots of other things. Well, this way, that makes me happy in some way that you're in touch and still the buddies, so to speak. So if you happen to mention that you were on the radio with Everything Old is New Again, you'll with Bob in the future, you both will have something to talk about new.
That show I called Commercial Interruptions, an evening of nothing but.
Yeah, and it was terrific. It looked really terrific and a lot of fun. Who created the routines that you performed?
I wrote them.
Every one? Was it all you or collaboration?
No, they're not old. what happened was the guy who ran that club. It was a rock and roll club and also folk singers. He had aspirations to be a Broadway producer or something, and he was getting sick, even though he was making a fortune, of seeing two different rock groups every single night of the week. And he thought he would try something different, and he came to me because he'd heard about me being busy in the commercial business, and he said he wanted to get prize-winning commercials and show them and have me be the master of ceremonies. We found that we couldn't get the releases, the waivers for them, because if you're making money at the door and you're not paying the SAG actors a fee, then you can't use them. So I had in 3 days to create a show, which was 90 minutes, and I just did it tirelessly 24/7, staying up late doing it. And I wrote all of these things out of my vast experience with producers and directors and other actors and things that happened to us. And I knew these people could execute it all beautifully. And, of course, they made certain contributions of their own.
And certainly it's something that is of interest to me in that by that time, the early 80s, you had been in Breaking Away already. You had been in Popeye. You had done, created the Electric Company. You'd been on stage before. Certainly, you then did this, created this performance, and I'm just wondering, the live stage for a comedian receiving the instant gratification we heard of the applause and so forth has got to be something that brought you back to this and keeps bringing you back to the stage every so often, no?
Oh, yeah, there's nothing better than a real live audience, I've done a lot of films and television, and a great many of them without an audience, especially film. A sitcom will often have an audience, but not always.
Right, and I'll tell you, I've looked back also, and I see in 1964, talking about commercials, you did a silent movie type of commercial for Ford Econoline, and you did it as a Keystone Cop, and from what I understand, you had the opportunity to meet Buster Keaton, who was in the commercial, I think directed the commercial as well, and for you, the word sure means more than it means to the rest of us. Maybe you can explain that a little bit.
At 15, I saw Keaton, Chaplin, Langdon, and Lloyd on film for the first time, and I fell in love with all of them, but I loved Keaton best. And all my life up until that point, when I met him, I'd just been thinking about him and seeing his classic films. And then one day I get this commercial, and here he is. He's Buster Keaton. And I was totally thrilled. And we had a 2-day shoot, and on the first day I said, if I come back tomorrow with a picture of you and a book you wrote, would you sign them? And he said, sure. And I wrote I'm writing a book now about my life, and then I said the first and only word I'd ever heard him speak.
Which is unbelievable that it remained with you, and that certainly is something when you meet your hero like that and influence. I presume that he was the one that influenced you with your comedy persona, so to speak, or the others that, as we...
I became, obviously, because I was born into a culture where the show business was all about talk, all about words. Very few people ever tried to do visual humor much. In fact, I'm a scholar of this, and I've kept in mind the fact that we had these geniuses like Chaplin and Keaton, and it took a long time before we saw a guy named Jacques Tati, a French comedian who worked mostly in silence. Another 25 years, and there's Bill Irwin, a great stage clown, who was in Popeye with me. And then I added to it this guy, Michael Richards, who worked on Seinfeld, who was great with physical comedy.
Yep.
And if he had been in silent movies, he would have been a star also. So every 20 or 25 years comes somebody along who is a master, or a number of masters, of the silent art of comedy.
Yeah, and maybe Dick Van Dyke a little bit too. I don't know, but
Van Dyke, yes, Van Dyke also.
But it's so rare, as we've just talked about. But it's for somebody. We've talked about this before. This topic, the silent movies, with David, my co-host, and he's in the same ballpark as you are with loving Keaton and Chaplin and all that. But for somebody that's listening has not seen these movies and want to give it a shot, Sherlock Jr. or Steamboat Bill, or what would be the suggested entry into this?
Those are my two favorites.
Oh, there you go.
It's because Moment for Moment, there's just more jokes, more funny stuff in them. They're very funny.
But if someone was
a lot of innovation by Buster by walking down the aisle of a movie theater and walking into the movie.
Right, exactly.
Which was in the Sherlock Jr., and by the way, lifted by Woody Allen in the Purple Rose of Cairo.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. You stole it from me. Good for you. And that's what it's all about. Like, that's a good example of everything old is new again, of Purple Rose of Cairo, using and building upon what Buster Keaton did. And I think, well maybe in a minute or two, and I know that's not fair, but can you describe for us why you felt Buster Keaton, and still feel he's so seminal and someone to, use as a foundation to your, experience in life today, or at least comedy?
Well, when I saw all of them, there are moments in all of them that I love. Langdon, who's not the most successful of the four, has little pockets of set pieces, which are just as funny as the others. It's just he never had a long career, and his movies weren't at every moment funny. With Chaplin and Keaton, they were. Well, my feeling was, Chaplin scared me. He was so artistic, so intelligent. I felt he was smarter than me, smarter than the audience, smarter than anybody, being a genius, and I could admire him from afar. Buster Keaton made me feel he's someone I knew. He seemed like an everyman. He seemed like you could sit down and have a beer with him. And there was more honesty, I felt, in Buster's acting. And he rarely reached for a joke. It didn't seem invented as much as comedy was. It seemed to happen to him. And so he was a writer and an actor and a director, but he always was humble and lovable, and without even using his face as part of the instrument, he could say anything with his body.
And did they... yeah, I'm sorry.
I just thought he was the most genius of them all. And he was very, very innovative in ways of doing movies, as you know.
Yes, and I was going to say, did he? This is something I remember. This is coming to my mind now. Hopefully I get this right. Did he have a competition, so to speak, with Chaplin and the others, where they would use less of these cards where the words are on? I forget what they call those cards, but use less of them to explain and tell their story? Was that something that was going around?
Well, I never read too much about the title cards in Chaplin. I have about 6 or 8 books on each of them. But Buster did always say, we tried to cut down on the title things.
That's what I thought.
Some of my silent films will have maybe 125 title cards. He says that almost anything I could say with a title card, I could say with my body. So he didn't have a lot of it. He didn't have a lot of things that were dialogue translated into a card.
Right.
And he would try to keep it down. He said to maybe 50.
That really stands out to me, though. Isn't that amazing that, instead of saying help, of course, just a silly example, but, in a card, he's able to express that silently. Yeah. And so what a skill. So if you're listening and you've not seen any of these movies, it is definitely worth your while. And you're going to get a smile, there's no doubt, and you may get hooked. I got to tell you, Steamboat Bill or Sherlock Jr., just as to tip your toe in the water, if you will, of silent movies. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again with Paul Dooley. Talk some more. Have some fun.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Now, can I help you, sir?
Yes, my name is George Kellerman.
Oh, yes, Mr. Kellerman. One moment, please.
Oh, don't tell me one moment, please. I don't have one moment. I was told to come here this morning, and if I don't get the room...
We have your room, Mr. Kellerman, suite 927. I was just getting a message that was left for you. Oh, things certainly have eased up since the transit strike was settled. Here we are. Your luggage arrived from the airport and was sent up to your room. Now, if you'll just sign the register.
Well, they finally settled. If they knew they were going to settle, why didn't they settle yesterday?
Are you all right, ma'am?
Well, does she look all right? Do you know what this woman has been through? Do you have any idea?
Tell him later, George. Help me now.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. Do you recognize that? That's a little clip of the Out-of-Towners. You recognize the voice? Well, yeah, that was Jack Lemmon, but also is our guest, Paul Dooley, in an early role there. And I'll tell you, that was, of course, Jack Lemmon was the original Felix in The Odd Couple. We'll get to all of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about stage and the connections with Odd Couple and these actors. But Mr. Dooley or Paul, I would like to wondering, like, you're a young actor. You've got Jack Lemmon acting in a scene with you, and you've got all of this to present. I don't know. For me, that would have been a bit intimidating. I'm going to guess it wasn't for you because you were on top of your craft for sure. But what was that experience like?
Well, I was glad to be there, and I love Jack. And I generally don't get intimidated because by that time I don't know how old I was. Maybe I was 30, 35. I don't know, 40. But after the first 3 or 4 or 5 years in show business, I I didn't have any, nervousness about meeting big names or to being on a stage in front of 1,000 people. I just was pretty relaxed about acting. Many actors are upset backstage. They're nervous. They throw up. They have all kind of superstitions, I just walked on stage and I was at home. So I never went through that thing of having stage fright or anything like that.
And I would assume that has to come from confidence in the fact that you've had such experience before, because, for example, in '65, on the Broadway production of The Odd Couple, directed by Mike Nichols, originally you were cast as a poker player with Walter Matthau, of course, playing Oscar Madison. And Art Carney, people may not remember or know, was the original Felix. Now, after Art Carney left the show, who replaced him? Paul Dooley, am I right?
I was the understudy.
And what was that like to step into the shoes of Art Carney at that time, who I believe by '65 certainly did all the Honeymooners things, had to have been quite revered. He did lots of stage work as well.
He was much more of a star than Matthau at that time. In fact, Odd Couple on Broadway made Matthau a star. He won the Tony that year.
Right.
But a funny thing happened is that Art was an alcoholic. We didn't know that right away when we started running the show. But after only 2 weeks in New York, he'd miss a night. And as you know, it's a tradition in the theater to call in and say, I'm not feeling well, I can't do it. But he never called. And the cast just guessed that he was in a bar nearby, maybe drunk, and felt, I can't go on tonight, but I'm embarrassed to call. So we never knew why he didn't call, but he never called. So 5 minutes of curtain, they'd say to me, get into the Felix outfit, you'll be playing Felix. But I did this many, 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 many times, once every 2 weeks or something, for a long time, and then he disappeared and never came back. We couldn't find him. His agent didn't know where he was. He had checked into a clinic to dry out from alcoholism and never came back.
Wow, isn't that incredible?
But I didn't feel I had anything to worry about playing the part, or even the poker player, because Neil Simon is a genius. Every line spoken is almost a laugh in An Odd Couple. The straight lines and the punchlines are both funny, because it's based on the difference between the sloppy guy and the neat guy. I had an interesting story. When I went to my audition, Mike Nichols knew who I was because I had been in Second City and he'd seen that show here in New York, and he'd been in the audience a few times. And I had 4 pages of audition, and I memorized it. Really stone cold memorized all the words. But it's always a good idea to hold the script in case you forget. But I was very confident. But halfway through the scene, when I had a big line that yelled at Matthau character, at the Oscar character, instead of just being angry on the line, I threw my script high in the air, and it fluttered down to the floor. So a moment like that, I've seen Groucho do things like many times, and it's a given in comedy. If you have something important in your hand, you throw it away. It's funny. Groucho used to get the bill for a dinner with his Margaret Dumont, and he was, I'll take that, and he wadded it up and threw it away. So that's always a laugh. So here I am with these papers on the floor. I get down on my knees, and now I can play the real part of Felix by being neat and picking them up as I do my dialogue. So then at the end of it, they usually wait a while before they see other people. Then they call your agent. As soon as I finished, Mike said, you got it. You got the job. And I think that moment of using the papers certainly helped.
Well, that has to go back a little bit, even maybe just in the back of your mind as a student. As, of course, you just said you knew about Groucho, but I would assume that Buster Keaton and his physical, use of his body and props, these different things may have subconsciously, or maybe consciously, you tell me, came to play there, or maybe it was improv, whatever it might have been. It was in you from all these influences, no?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, when I was in Second City, one of the scenes I created, which became a little bit of a classic because I did it for about a year, was a pantomime. Alan Arkin and I did a scene when he was with the company, and it was about 2 minutes. He was a dentist and I was a patient, and it was silent comedy. And then he'd got a Broadway show and left the company. I took over and played the dentist with a new patient named Bob Dishy. And we expanded it to about 6 minutes. It was all pantomime and very much like a Keaton-type movie. And all the things you can do, to a patient, almost attacking him, really. And I also, once I was in high school and had seen the classic comics, a guy and I who owned the projector, who loved silent comedy, was a scholar. He and I went out on the weekends and made silent movies with custard pies and derbies and top hats and canes and all that stuff. And we did it all through high school and college and even in New York. So I made about 20 or 30 short, 3-minute films imitating our masters, not really identically imitating, but in the genre,
Right. And then thereafter use those, I'm sure, here. Didn't you use one to get that? Maybe you did or not. I don't recall. To get that that Buster Keaton commercial or no?
No, that just happened. They didn't know I loved Keaton. But by the way, because you're interested in trivia, Barney Martin, who played Seinfeld's dad, was one of the Keystone Cops in that Buster commercial.
Yeah. Is that
and
amazing?
another one was Avery Schreiber, who was a comedian with Jack Burns.
Right, Burns and Schreiber. Yep.
Yep, and he's from Second City, and he was one of the other cops. There were about 5 of us or 6 of us, but those 2 guys I knew, and they were very good. By the way, Barney Martin used to be Jackie Gleason's understudy. Barney Martin was a New York City cop, and he was assigned to stand at the stage door of the Ed Sullivan Theater where Gleason shot his show. And he got to know the cast, and he was a funny policeman. And they said, would you consider the possibility of working here and being Jackie's understudy? He doesn't like to rehearse, but you can stand in for him. And he did that for a while with Gleason.
That's just an amazing. I had heard that, but I never followed up on that. That's an amazing story, and he must have had some great stories about Gleason back in the day. And talk about.
Well, among my idols are Gleason and Sid Caesar too.
Oh, Sid Caesar, we did a whole couple of shows on him, and I'll tell you what. Just to divert a little bit, my dad in the '60s would tell me that Sid Caesar was the funniest man in the world, whatever he would say, and he'd just laugh and so forth. Now he's going through a little bit of a struggle here mentally, and he's 89 and what have you. I go to the home, and on YouTube they've got a number of Sid Caesar skits. Don't you know that I bring my 8-year-old with me? The 3 of us are watching Sid Caesar from 1956, doing skits on this and that. He's bringing home Chinese food. His wife has already cooked a steak. They don't know that each have done that, and there's the dispute that arises. And honestly, there's my dad laughing so much that my son afterwards says, I never saw Grandpa laugh that much. So that's got to be to me, that's some tribute to Caesar. I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
In my book, I'm writing a moment about being in New York in my first year, and the networks had not yet had a way in place to get people to come to their live shows. They didn't have that thing of people writing in for tickets. So ushers and pages from NBC and CBS will come out on the street in the middle of the day and pass out free tickets, try to bring you in, try to force you into come in and watch a live show. So I saw many of the Caesar live shows, and what a privilege that was.
Oh, that must have been. We could do a whole show on that. Just what the experience was to see that live and those performances, and thankfully, from what I understand, lots of them are lost. But thankfully, there are quite a few on YouTube. If anyone wants to take a look at that. But back to Paul, I really want to say that finally, I don't know if we can do this now. We'll come on the other side of the commercial tease that you then continue the Odd Couple Connection 2007, acted with Jack Klugman, of course. Oscar Madison on television in The Sunshine Boys in New Jersey.
Right. It's interesting you know that because the IMDb and the Google only really list films and television.
Right, so that took a little bit of research.
They don't say very often cover legitimate theater.
I appreciate that. We will be back to discuss that and more right here on Everything Old's New Again.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Attention! Kiss the pavement goodbye, gentlemen. When I'm finished with you, you'll have mud in places you didn't know you had.
Yo, I've never been off-road.
Well, that's gonna change right now. Hello, face. Drop and give me 20 miles. Go, 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 go.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. That's Paul Dooley playing Sarge in Cars 1, 2, and 3. He's been in the entertainment business for a long time, and we're happy that he has been to share some of those experiences with us here. I'm going to cheat and say and welcome Paul Dooley back right now and say, listen, we've got to have you back if you don't mind. If you will, we'll see if you had a nice time, because there's so much more to discuss here. I hate to limit the time, but we're just having a great time with Paul Dooley. Thank you for coming on board.
Thank you.
And here we go. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the people you worked with. And I was just finishing up a little bit about the discussion and the kind of the what I call the odd couple connection here is certainly you started out with a little bit of we started out with Jack Lemmon, the Out of Towners. We spoke about you being Felix on the Broadway production after Art Carney acting with Walter Matthau, and then we talked about that you were in the Sunshine Boys in 2007 in New Jersey, the performance of that with Jack Klugman, of course, who was also Oscar Madison. So is there any way you could tell us anything about either of those three individuals that maybe is behind-the-scenes story or an experience, or at least your impression of any one of them, to give us some peel back the onion a little bit towards them and their experiences?
Well, Jack, the secret to Jack being a great comedy, which he did in the series The Odd Couple, is that underneath the surface of his comedy is a great actor. He's really, really a serious, good actor. As you know from when he did Quincy, he went from The Odd Couple to Quincy. Right. But he told me an interesting story that I like to repeat to people. He came to New York very early. It must have been late 40s, early 50s. And he got a ticket to Death of a Salesman, and he hadn't been in theater much or anything back in Philly, where he came from. I guess he had a little experience, but he must have had a yearning to maybe be an actor. He never told me about any of that part of it, but I bought a ticket. It was something like $1.50 to see a Broadway play, and one of the best Broadway plays, the Death of a Salesman. He went back 4 times. He said he couldn't believe how good it was, and it hooked him into being a stage actor. And we had a great deal of fun. We worked over in a little regional theater in New Jersey. Matthau was a little bit of a different story. He was hugely perfect for the part of Oscar Madison. He was born to play the role. And as I mentioned earlier, he won the Tony that year, and it really set him up to be a star. However, he was very mischievous on stage, and not all the other actors liked it. He would play games, and he would talk to you while you're delivering your lines. Sometimes an actor on stage, underneath a laugh, would say to another actor, whisper to him, "That went very well." That's a little thing actors might do sometimes. Right. But he used to talk to you while you were delivering your lines, and ad-libbing stuff that didn't help you do your lines properly. And he would, once he came in and someone had opened a bag of potato chips with the poker players, and they're in the air. He comes into a beer, and he opens one, and he shook it up in the wings, so it sprays all over the actors, and it was a highlight of the play. Picture of it in Life magazine a week or 2 later. But these kind of things, they were very mischievous and very game-playing, and it's not normally done on Broadway. It's usually you kind of stick closely to the script and don't change anything.
Yeah, so people weren't too happy with seeing or experiencing that, I guess, huh?
Not really, but then I started playing the lead opposite him, so I had to put up with it.
Well, he tested your limits, I guess you could say that, right? And another character that you never acted with before. I was interested to see that back in '52, when you graduated from University of West Virginia in Morgantown, that you palled around with and graduated with James Dukas. Yes, but you, I don't know what else to say. I don't think he was in the class with you, but Don Knotts was part of your experience there. Yeah. So, like,
I was a freshman, he was a senior, but I got to know Don.
There you go. So, because you're a fountain of information here that we just want to peek a little bit into behind the scenes. You see Don Knotts on these movies, and you know the Reluctant Astronaut. You see him on, of course, Andy Griffith. But was he driven? Like, it's hard to tell from his character what he was behind the scenes. You know, some people, the character doesn't seem to be far from what you're seeing acting on the screen, but I would assume, I don't know, that he wasn't that character, Barney Fife. But he created such a memorable and Emmy Award-winning character, and of course those movies were great.
One of the best.
Yeah.
One of the best characters ever created.
I would think so. But
I'll tell you something about him people don't know. Don, as a young man, maybe 14 at least, I have a book on him. It's a book he put out through Duke University, Barney Fife. And he was entertaining as a ventriloquist. He had a vent doll in his lap. And so he began comedy early. And by the time he went through high school, he was known around the high school, and that was his college town where we all went to school. When he went to college, he did 3 years, still doing a lot of comedy and plays and things. He used to write songs and lyrics, and he taught me my first magic trick. And then he was drafted, and he only had 1 year of college to go, but he had done so much amateur acting and talent things that they put him in special services. And for 2 years in the Army, he never carried a gun. He never dug a foxhole. He entertained people in Army camps all over the country. And he went to school on that. It became his training ground. And every day he would just travel around to different places, sometimes with a partner, sometimes alone, and create comedy. So by the time I met him when he came back for his senior year, he was a polished professional comedian. And he had it all down, and he would do routines for us, and some of the stuff he even repeated later on the Steve Allen show. But he was just naturally funny, and had a kind of an interesting wrinkle on things. It was a little bit different from all other things. On the Steve Allen show, he's famous for playing a nervous guy.
Right.
And Steve would say to him on the Man on the Street interview, he'd say, "Pardon me, sir, are you nervous?" He'd, No. And obviously was. So he was an incredible, funny comedian. And he never did nightclubs or Vegas or any of that, but he had been in that War with the Army on Broadway in a small part, and in the movie, just a small part. So when Andy started his show out there, he just called up and said, "Look, Andy, we know each other. I hear you're doing a show. Anything in it for me?" He says, "Well, come on out and talk to the producers." So they hired him right away, and he kind of really took over the show, and Andy was his straight man.
Yeah, and
he was the funnier one.
It's so amazing to see that he, what would you say, cut his teeth, is that the saying, in the Navy. And I read a little something about him. It might be true, might be not, maybe you know, is that the ventriloquism wasn't going so well at some points. He was on the Navy ship. He threw it overboard and said, "I could do this on my own," right? And and went from there.
My knowledge is that he was only in the Army.
Oh, okay, in the Army. Okay, fair enough. But then the story may be...
He may have thrown a dummy away. I don't know.
But what was he personally like? I mean, you were buddies apparently then, I guess. Like, was he driven? Was he always talking comedy? Was he sort of,
No, he wasn't like a lot of comedians who just couldn't shut up about comedy. He was very, very average. I used to have fun with him because he once showed me the ventriloquist act. And his voice and the dummy's voice were the same voice. "Hello, Johnny." "Yeah, what is it, Don?"
Well, I guess
he was married to someone in college, and I'd call him up at the house, and he would answer, and I'd say, "Your name was Kay, I think, I forget." And then he'd say, "Hello," and I'd say, hi, Kay, is Don home?" "No, this is Don." I used to kid him because his voice was a little high.
That's hysterical. Now, you acted with, just going to try a broad brush here, and throw some of this out at you, and grab it or not, just to let everybody know that you shared the screen, so to speak, with Don Adams, with Robin Williams and Popeye, Runaway Bride. You had Gary Marshall behind the scenes, Fred Willard, with respect to The Mighty Wind and Waiting for Guffman. So you've had experiences with people that are certainly well known for their craft, but with respect to Fred, we'll leave off on Fred Willard there, because the improvisation act and would you say the improvisation performance that Fred Willard brought and Christopher Guest bring to the table, and of course you were in Curb Your Enthusiasm, so you got that there with Larry David. Is that something? I mean, that's got to be like walking on fire or something. You really got to have your wits about you, but I'm sure it could be the most rewarding experience there is. No, this improv.
Well, it is, because you're being a writer as well as an actor when you improvise. someone has to have written it because it's there. And so if you improvise, you would help write it, help write the scene. Everyone in Chris Guest's movies pretty generally could improvise. Maybe one or two of them might just be regular actors.
Right.
But, of course, he's a comic genius. I met him when he was 17. His mother was an agent, and she was my agent. She had been recommended to me by Alan Arkin. And he was 17. I met him. We did a little improvisational show for PBS, a lot of the improvisers together, and he had a small part in it, had a guitar, played a few areas where he played his guitar, a few lines here and there, but it was a small part. But I knew then he had a big talent. Here's a bit of trivia. He has a one-day part, as I do. If I had a two-day part, he had a one-day part in the first Death Wish.
Huh.
And his mother is a casting director, so she cast me, her client, and her son. And he has a nice little moment in Death Wish, the first one.
And then before
he's a genius. He's an incredible comic genius.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time here for this week, but we will be back next week with Paul Dooley, talk all things pop culture, entertainment, right here. Everything old is new again.